The rain over Chicago didn't fall. It was driven against the glass of the Ethelgard Tower like shrapnel. From the 42nd floor, the city was nothing but a grid of bioluminescent veins, a sprawling circuit board of amber and cold blue light shivering under the storm. Elias Thorne stood with his forehead resting against the cold, reinforced pane. His breath fogged the glass, momentarily obscuring the view of the empire he had inherited. At 32, Elias possessed the kind of face that magazines love to plaster on 30 under 30 lists. Sharp jawline, eyes that suggested a depth of intellect, and a mouth that had been trained to smile for shareholders even when the numbers were bleeding. But tonight, the reflection staring back at him was a stranger. He looked like a ghost haunting his own life, trapped in a $5,000 Italian suit that felt less like clothing and more like a straitjacket. The office behind him was a cavern of silence. It was a space designed to intimidate, filled with minimalist furniture that cost more than most people's homes, anchored by a massive desk made of reclaimed black oak. On that desk sat a single, blinking terminal. It was the red light that was driving him insane. Elias turned away from the window, the leather soles of his shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. He approached the desk as if it were a bomb he had to defuse. He sat down, the leather chair creaking softly, the only organic sound in the sterile room, and tapped the spacebar. The screen flared to life. Subject, payroll discrepancy, ticket number 99420 from System Administrator to E. Thorne, private server, status. Blocked/quarantined. Another one. For 3 months, ever since his father's funeral, Elias had been haunted by digital ghosts. It started as a glitch in the legacy server, a backdoor channel his father had set up years ago for emergency comms that the current IT department seemed to have forgotten about. Through this crack in the corporate firewall, messages were leaking through. They weren't the polished, sanitized weekly reports Marcus Vane, the CFO, placed on his desk every Monday morning. These were raw, desperate screams from the bottom of the pyramid. My hours were cut, but the log says I worked 40. The safety railing on line 4 is rusted through. Maintenance says no budget. Who is MV Consulting? Why is half our pension fund routed there? Elias opened the drawer and pulled out the official financial report Marcus had delivered 4 hours ago. The paper was heavy, creamy, smelling of expensive ink. The graphs were all pointing up. The summary was full of buzzwords. Optimization, synergy, streamlining. According to Marcus, Ethelgard Tech was entering a golden age. According to the blinking red light on his screen, Ethelgard was a rotting carcass being picked clean by vultures. He reached for the internal line. His hand hovered over the receiver. He could call Marcus right now. He could drag the board in here, scream, throw the papers, demand an audit. But he knew exactly how that scene would play out. Marcus would smile that oily, paternal smile. He would talk about clerical errors and disgruntled former employees. He would pat Elias on the shoulder, remind him that he was young, that he was grieving, that he should take a vacation to the Aspen Lodge and leave the heavy lifting to the veterans who had served his father for decades. They would gaslight him until he doubted his own sanity. They saw him not as a CEO, but as a lucky sperm club winner, a figurehead to cut ribbons while they carved up the kingdom. Elias withdrew his hand. "No," he whispered, the word swallowed by the vast room. Not this time. He stood up, a sudden electric energy surging through his limbs. He walked to the private bathroom adjoining his office. The lighting here was harsh, clinical. He gripped the edges of the marble sink, staring at himself in the mirror. The man looking back was Elias Thorne, the billionaire heir. That man couldn't walk into a warehouse in the South Side without an entourage of sycophants cleaning the floor before he stepped on it. That man would never hear the truth. Elias Thorne had to die. He opened the medicine cabinet. Inside, next to a bottle of prescription sleeping pills he hadn't touched in weeks, lay a pair of grooming scissors. He picked them up. The steel was cold, heavy. He didn't hesitate. The first cut was jagged. A lock of perfectly coiffed, dark hair fell into the pristine white sink. Felt like a violation, and then, instantly like a liberation, he hacked away at the style that cost $300 a month to maintain. He cut it short, uneven, rough. He scraped his fingernails against the granite counter, dirtying them, ruining the manicure. He stopped shaving. The stubble that was already showing gave him a weary, neglected look. He stripped off the suit jacket and let it drop to the floor. Then the tie. Then the shirt with the monogrammed cuffs. He kicked them into a corner, a pile of silk and wool that represented his shackles. From the back of his closet, buried behind rows of designer coats, he found what he was looking for. It was a duffel bag from his college days, from a brief summer he spent hiking in the Rockies before his father dragged him back to the boardroom. Inside was a gray hoodie, stained with motor oil from a breakdown years ago, and a pair of stiff, unwashed denim jeans. He pulled them on. The fabric was rough against his skin, abrasive and honest. He found a pair of heavy work boots, scuffed and worn. As he laced them up, he felt his center of gravity shift. He wasn't walking on air anymore, he was grounded. Finally, he took a pair of thick-rimmed glasses from the bag, cheap reading glasses he'd bought at a gas station for a costume party years ago. He slid them on. The world blurred slightly at the edges, softening the sharp lines of the luxury office. He looked in the mirror again. Elias Thorne was gone. In his place stood Ben. Ben looked tired. Ben looked like he owed rent. Ben looked invisible. He checked his pockets. No guolit. No platinum cards. Just a wad of crumpled cash. $200, enough to survive a week if he was careful. And a fake ID he had procured from a contact in the darker corners of the internet 3 days ago, just in case he ever worked up the nerve to do this. Ben. Age 28. High school diploma. Last employment. General labor. It was time. Elias No Ben grabbed the duffel bag. He didn't take the private elevator that required a retinal scan and would log his exit time. Instead, he pried open the maintenance panel in the hallway, slipping into the service stairwell. The descent was brutal. 42 flights of concrete stairs. With every floor he descended, the air changed. The smell of lemon verbena and conditioned air faded, replaced by the stale odor of dust, old coffee, and industrial cleaner. The silence of the penthouse was replaced by the hum of the building's guts, the rattling of HVAC pipes, the distant thrum of the generators. By the time he reached the ground floor, his legs burned. He exited through the loading dock at the rear of the tower, slipping out just as a delivery truck rumbled in, masking his movement from the sleepy security guard in the booth. The Chicago wind hit him like a physical blow. It was colder down here in the alleyways than it ever was in the climate-controlled tower. The rain soaked through his hoodie instantly, chilling him to the bone. It was a miserable, biting cold, but it felt real. He pulled the hood up and kept his head down, walking toward the subway station. He wasn't taking the limousine. He was taking the red line south, past the glittering loop, past the gentrified condos, down into the industrial heart of the city where Ethelgard's distribution center sat like a fortress of corrugated steel and secrets. The train ride was a blur of neon lights and tired faces. No one looked at him. For the first time in his life, Elias was completely anonymous. He wasn't a target for a pitch, a lawsuit, or a marriage proposal. He was just another body taking up space. It was intoxicating. He got off at the 95th Street station. The Ethelgard Logistics Center loomed in the distance, a massive, windowless block surrounded by chain-link fences topped with razor wire. Floodlights swept the perimeter, cutting through the rain. It didn't look like a workplace. It looked like a penitentiary. A line of people had already formed at the side gate, huddled against the brick wall to escape the wind. It was 4:30 a.m., the morning shift intake. Ben joined the back of the line. The man in front of him was coughing, a wet, hacking sound that rattled in his chest. The woman behind him was muttering a prayer, clutching a rosary. "New guy?" The voice came from the coughing man. He turned around. He was older, maybe 50, but his face was lined like a roadmap of hard years. His eyes were yellowed, tired. Ben nodded, shoving his hands deep into his pockets to hide the fact that his knuckles weren't calloused yet. "Yeah. First day. Keep your head down. the man rasped, spitting on the wet pavement. And don't look the supervisors in the eye. They smell fear like dogs. Is it that bad? Ben asked, trying to pitch his voice lower, rougher. The man laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Bad? Kid, this ain't a job. It's a meat grinder. You go in whole, you come out in pieces. But hey, he gestured to the massive, glowing logo of Ethelgard high above the warehouse entrance. A stylized shield that was supposed to represent protection. At least the pay is $15 an hour, right? If they don't dock you for breathing too loud. The heavy steel gates groaned open. A siren wailed, signaling the shift change. It was a sound that triggered a primal instinct to run. But the line shuffled forward, a slow march of the desperate. As Ben crossed the threshold, passing under the shadow of the company his father had built, he felt a wave of nausea. From the penthouse, Ethelgard was a symbol of innovation. From down here, in the mud and the rain, it was a monster opening its maw. He stepped inside. The noise hit him first. A cacophony of conveyor belts screeching, forklifts beeping, and shouting voices echoing off the metal rafters. The air smelled of ozone, packing tape, and nervous sweat. This was the belly of the beast. And Elias Thorne was right where he needed to be. ID! A security guard barked, holding out a scanner. Ben handed over the fake card. His heart hammered against his ribs. If this failed, if the scanner flagged him, it was over. He'd be unmasked, humiliated, and the board would use it as proof of his mental instability to oust him. The machine beeped. A green light flashed. "Move it, Ben," the guard grunted, not even looking up. He walked into the locker room, surrounded by hundreds of men and women stripping off wet coats and pulling on neon safety vests. He was in. He found his assigned locker, number 402, a dented metal box near the bathrooms. As he shoved his wet hoodie inside, he caught sight of a notice pinned to the corkboard on the wall. It was a memo from corporate, printed on glossy paper. From the office of the CFO, due to rising operational costs, the complimentary coffee service in the break room will be suspended until further notice. We appreciate your dedication to efficiency. Ben stared at the memo. He thought of the $200 bottle of Scotch Marcus Vane had opened during yesterday's lunch meeting. A hand clamped onto his shoulder, making him jump. "You're the new temp, right?" Ben turned. A massive man with a clipboard and a neck as thick as a tree trunk loomed over him. His name tag read Rick, floor manager. His eyes were cold, assessing Ben like he was a piece of machinery with a questionable warranty. "Yeah," Ben said. "That's me. I don't care who you were before, or where you came from," Rick said, his voice cutting through the locker room noise. "You're in my house now. You got a quota to hit. 300 units an hour. You miss it, you're out. You break something, you pay for it. You get hurt because you were stupid? We don't know you. Clear?" "Clear," Ben replied. "Good. You're on line 7. Inventory and sorting. Move your ass." Rick shoved the clipboard into Ben's chest and stormed off. Ben took a deep breath, inhaling the stale air. He grabbed a safety vest and pulled it on. It was tight, restrictive. He walked out onto the warehouse floor. The sheer scale of it was dizzying. Miles of conveyor belts twisted like roller coasters. Mountains of boxes were stacked to the ceiling. And everywhere, people were moving with frantic, terrified speed. He looked up toward the ceiling, where cameras with blinking red eyes watched every move. Somewhere, miles away and 50 floors up, those cameras were feeding data to a server that Marcus Vane controlled. "I'm coming for you, Marcus," Ben thought, stepping onto the assembly line. The belt roared to life. The first box slid toward him. It was heavy, wrapped in brown tape. Ben grabbed it, the cardboard rough against his unhardened palms. The game had begun. The concept of time died within the walls of the Ethelgard distribution center. There was no morning, no afternoon, no evening. There was only the belt. It was a black rubber river that flowed endlessly, a serpent that never slept, carrying the desires of the American consumer in brown cardboard boxes. For Elias Thorne, now simply Ben, the first 4 hours were a physical shock that bordered on trauma. His body, honed by personal trainers in air-conditioned gyms and nourished by organic meal plans, was entirely unprepared for the repetitive, grinding violence of the assembly line. It wasn't the weight of the boxes that broke him. It was the rhythm. Pick up, scan, label, stack, pick up, scan, label, stack, every 7 seconds. The quota was absolute. The noise was the physical weight. The roar of the conveyor belts was a constant, low-frequency thrum that vibrated in his teeth. Above that, the screech of packing tape guns, the beep of scanners, and the mechanical groan of forklifts created a chaotic symphony of industry. The air was thick with cardboard dust, a dry, papery taste that coated the back of his throat and made his eyes itch. Line 7. Pick up the pace. Rick's voice boomed over the localized PA system, distorted and harsh. We're lagging 2% behind projection. You want a break? Earn it. Ben gritted his teeth. His hands were already raw. He had taped his fingers with cheap electrical tape he found in the locker room, but the cardboard edges sliced through it. A blister on his thumb had burst an hour ago, the sting sharp and constant, a tiny alarm bell ringing against his nerves. He looked down at the box in front of him. A high-end espresso machine. Retail price, $800. More than most of the people standing in this line made in a week. He slapped the shipping label onto the box. It was crooked. Beep, beep, beep. The scanner flashed red. The belt stopped. Silence. The sudden absence of the mechanical roar was more terrifying than the noise itself. Every head on line 7 turned toward him. 20 pairs of eyes. Tired, fearful, resentful. New guy jammed the line, someone muttered. Rick was there in seconds. He moved with the predatory speed of a man who enjoyed his petty authority. He loomed over Ben, the fluorescent lights reflecting off his sweaty, bald scalp. You blind? Or just stupid? Rick asked, his voice dangerously quiet. He tapped the crooked label with a thick finger. The scanner can't read the barcode if you fold it over the edge. Basic physics. Day 1 stuff. I'm sorry, Ben said, keeping his head down. My hands. They slipped. Slipped? Rick repeated, tasting the word like spoiled milk. He pulled a digital tablet from his belt. That's a line stoppage. 90 seconds. That's $300 of lost productivity. He tapped the screen. That's coming out of your check, Ben. And you're on a strike. 3 strikes and security escorts you out. And trust me, they aren't gentle. I understand, Ben whispered. The Elias Thorne inside him wanted to laugh. $300? He used to tip valets more than that. But Ben, the warehouse worker, felt the crushing weight of the threat. It wasn't just money. It was survival. Rick restarted the line with a slam of a button. The belt roared back to life. Don't test me, college boy. I know your type. You think you're slumming it until something better comes along. In here, you're just meat. Rick walked away, and the rhythm resumed. Pick up, scan, label, stack. But now Ben was shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, simmering rage. He had seen the spreadsheets. He knew the margins. A 90-second stoppage cost the company pennies in real terms. The $300 figure was a fabrication used to terrorize the workforce. It was psychological warfare. Don't let him get to you, a voice whispered from the station to his left. Ben glanced over without stopping his hands. It was the woman from the intake line earlier, Sarah. Up close, under the harsh industrial lighting, she looked even more exhausted than before. There were dark circles bruised under her eyes, and her gray hair was pulled back in a fraying bun. Her hands moved with a fluid, unconscious grace, handling the boxes as if they were extensions of her own limbs. He likes fresh meat, Sarah murmured, slapping a label perfectly onto a box of vitamins. Makes him feel big. Just find the rhythm. Don't think. Just move. 1, 2, 3, slap. 1, 2, 3, slap. Thanks, Ben breathed, trying to mimic her cadence. Save your breath, she advised. You'll need it for the rush hour. The rush hour hit at 10 a.m. The volume of packages doubled. The belt sped up. It was a blur of motion that turned men into machines. Ben lost all sense of self. He became a pair of hands, a back that ached, feet that burned. He forgot about the boardroom, the stocks, the legacy. He only knew the box. When the horn finally blew for the 30-minute lunch break, Ben nearly collapsed. The belt stopped, and a collective groan went up from the floor. People slumped against pillars or sat directly on the concrete, too tired to walk to the break room. Ben forced himself to move. He needed to see the rest of the facility. He needed to find the rot. The break room was a windowless cell painted a cheerful, nauseating yellow that had peeled to reveal gray concrete underneath. Vending machines lined one wall, half of them flashing out of order. The microwave smelled of burnt popcorn and old grease. He bought a bottle of lukewarm water for $3, a markup that would be illegal in a regular store, and sat at a wobbly laminate table across from Sarah. She was carefully unwrapping a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. It looked like peanut butter and jelly on stale bread. "You made it to lunch," Sarah said, offering him a tired smile. "That puts you ahead of the last 3 guys. Does it ever get easier?" Ben asked, cracking the seal on the water. "No," Sarah said simply. "You just get numbness in the right places. Your back stops hurting because the nerves give up. Your feet go hard." She took a small bite of her sandwich. "You got family, Ben?" "No," he lied. "Just me." "You?" Sarah's face softened, the lines of exhaustion momentarily smoothing out. She pulled a cracked smartphone from her pocket and tapped the screen. The wallpaper was a picture of a smiling girl, maybe 10 years old, wearing a hospital gown but giving a thumbs up. "That's Lily?" Sarah said, her voice filled with a fierce, protective love. "She's my world. She's sick, heart condition, congenital. She looks brave," Ben said, feeling a lump form in his throat. "She's a warrior," Sarah said, putting the phone away. "Surgery is scheduled for Friday. It's been a nightmare getting approved. The company insurance. They fight you for every penny. They denied the pre-auth 3 times. Said it was elective." She scoffed, a bitter sound. "Elective, like living is a choice. But it's approved now?" Ben asked, leaning in. "Barely. I have to maintain full-time status. 35 hours a week minimum to keep the gold tier coverage. If I drop below, even for a week, they downgrade me to silver, and the deductible shoots up to $10,000. I can't afford that. I'd have to sell everything, and I don't have much left to sell."
Ben frowned.
35 hours? But we're working 10-hour shifts, 6 days a week. You're clearing 60 hours easy. Sarah looked around, lowering her voice. "On paper, sure. But check your pay stub, Ben. Watch the clock." "What do you mean?" "The glitch," she whispered. "It happens every Tuesday and Thursday. The system logs us out for extended breaks we never took. Or the time clock crashes during overtime hours and resets to standard time. I keep a notebook." She tapped her chest pocket. "I write down every minute I work. Last week, they shaved 4 hours off my check. 4 hours. That puts me dangerously close to the cutoff line for the insurance." "Did you report it?" "To who? HR?" Sarah laughed, a dry, hopeless sound. "HR is in the same building as the executive offices downtown. You call the hotline, you get a robot. You complain to Rick, and suddenly your schedule changes to the graveyard shift, or you get written up for insubordination. Keep your head down, Ben. It's the only way to survive." Elias felt the blood rushing in his ears. This wasn't just negligence. It was an algorithm of theft. A systematic shaving of minutes and hours across thousands of employees. It saved the company millions and cost people their lives. "Attention all personnel." The PA system crackled, cutting through the break room chatter. "Lunch is over in 2 minutes. Return to stations." Sarah sighed, wrapping up the remaining half of her sandwich. "Dinner," she muttered. As they walked back to the floor, Ben noticed something. He saw Rick standing by the time clock station near the supervisor's elevated office. The crow's nest, as the workers called it. Rick was holding a keycard, tapping it against the terminal repeatedly. "Beep." Beep, beep. He wasn't clocking in. He was overriding. Ben slowed down, pretending to tie his boot. From his vantage point, he could see the screen of the time clock. It flashed. Batch edit, shift 2. Deduct 15-minute break. He was manually inserting break times for the entire line. 15 minutes of unpaid time, deducted from hundreds of people who were currently standing on the concrete floor waiting for the belt to start. Hey! Ben snapped his head up. Rick was staring down at him from the platform. Bootlace tied yet, Shakespeare? Or do you need a manual? Coming, Ben said, standing up. He kept his face blank, but his mind was racing. He had the what. Now he needed the proof. The digital trail. The afternoon shift was a blur of agony. Ben's shoulders felt like they were on fire, but his mind was cold, calculating. He watched the flow of data. The scanners connected to the local Wi-Fi. The time clocks were hardwired. All the cables ran up into the ceiling, bundled in thick conduits, snake-like and dusty, leading toward the north wall of the facility. At 4 p.m., a commotion broke out near Bay 12. Help! Someone help! The line stopped. Ben ran toward the sound, ignoring Rick's shouting orders to stay put. A young man, no older than 20, was on the ground, clutching his leg. A pallet of heavy detergent boxes had collapsed. The plastic wrap had snapped, and 500 pounds of liquid soap had crushed his ankle. The angle of his foot was wrong, sickeningly wrong. Don't move him. Sarah was there, kneeling beside the boy, her hands hovering over the injury. Somebody call 911. Rick pushed through the crowd. Back up. Give him air. Nobody calls 911. His leg is broken. Rick, Sarah shouted, her voice trembling with rage. Look at it. I said nobody calls. Rick snarled, pointing at the onlookers. We handle this internally. Calling an ambulance triggers an OSHA audit. You want the plant shut down? You want to lose your paychecks for a week because this idiot couldn't stack a pallet, right? He turned to the boy who was sobbing in pain. Get him up. Get him to the nurse's office. We'll call a private transport. He can't walk. Ben stepped forward. The words came out before he could stop them. It was the command voice of Elias Thorne. You move him now, you sever the nerve. He needs a paramedic. Rick turned on Ben, his face purple. I told you to shut your mouth, temp. You want to play hero? You can play hero in the unemployment line. If you don't call, Ben said, stepping closer, his height matching Rick's, then I will, and I'll tell them exactly how long you waited. The air in the warehouse froze. For a second, the class divide vanished. It was just two men. And in Ben's eyes, Rick saw something he didn't recognize in a minimum wage worker. He saw a lack of fear. Rick hesitated. He looked at the boy, then at the crowd of workers who were silently watching, their phones starting to emerge from pockets. Fine rikspat. Call them. But this is on you, kid. You just cost everyone their safety bonus. As the paramedics arrived and loaded the boy onto a stretcher, Ben felt a hand on his arm. It was Sarah. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered, though her eyes shone with gratitude. He's going to come for you now. Let him come, Ben said. The shift ended at 8 p.m. Ben walked out into the night, his body screaming, his clothes soaked in sweat. But he didn't head to the train station. He waited in the shadows of the overflow parking lot, watching the building. He watched the shift change. He watched the lights in the main office flick off. He had to get back inside. Not as a worker, but as a ghost. He knew where the data lived. During the chaos of the accident, he had followed the conduit lines with his eyes. They didn't go to the manager's office. They went to a secured room behind the loading bays. A room with no windows and a heavy steel door marked authorized personnel only server node 4. That was the brain. That was where the glitches were born. That was where Marcus Vane buried the bodies. Ben pulled his hood up. The rain had started again, washing away the dust of the day. He reached into his pocket and fingered the USB drive he had taped to the inside of his jeans. Sarah needed that surgery on Friday. Today was Tuesday. He had 3 days to bring the empire down. He moved toward the perimeter fence, looking for the gap he had spotted on the satellite maps 3 days ago. It was time to stop stacking boxes and start opening them. The rain had turned the perimeter of the Ethelgard Logistics Center into a swamp of oil-slicked mud and freezing slush. It was 2 a.m., the dead hour, that hollow span of time between the exhaustion of the late shift and the groggy arrival of the early risers, when the world seemed to hold its breath. Elias Thorne lay on his stomach in the wet grass, 50 yards from the chain-link fence. The cold was a physical weight, pressing him into the earth, soaking through the canvas of his jacket until his skin felt numb. But the shivering wasn't just from the temperature. It was adrenaline, sharp and metallic, flooding a system that was accustomed to boardrooms and heated leather seats, not covert infiltration in the industrial wasteland of South Chicago. He watched the patrol pattern of the security rover. It was a white SUV with amber lights spinning lazily on the roof, making a slow circuit every 15 minutes. The driver was bored. Elias could see the glow of a phone screen illuminating the guard's face as the vehicle rounded the northwest corner. 15 minutes, Elias whispered to himself, the steam of his breath vanishing instantly in the wind. Go. He pushed himself up, his boots sliding in the mud. He sprinted toward the fence, keeping his body low, moving with a desperate, clumsy urgency. He wasn't a spy, he was a man running on anger. He reached the section of the fence he had spotted on the satellite imagery days ago, a spot obscured by a towering dumpster and overgrown weeds. As he had hoped, the chain links here had been cut and loosely wired back together, likely by workers sneaking out for unauthorized smoke breaks or worse. He pulled at the wire. It groaned, a rusty sound that seemed deafening in the silence. He froze, looking back at the guard tower. The spotlight swept past, missing him by 10 feet. He squeezed through the gap, the jagged metal snagging his jacket, tearing the sleeve. He didn't care. He was inside. The loading bay was a cavern of shadows. Unlike the chaotic roar of the day, the facility at night felt like a tomb. Massive semi-trucks sat docked in rows like sleeping beasts, their engines cold. Elias moved between them, sticking to the deepest shadows, his eyes scanning for the cameras. He knew their blind spots, not because he had hacked them yet, but because he had approved the budget for their installation 3 years ago. He knew the cheap corners the security contractor had cut to save margin. He reached the side service door near Bay 4. It was locked, naturally, but this was an exterior door used by maintenance. Elias pulled a small, ruggedized device from his pocket. Not a phone, but a high-end signal cloner he'd purchased on the dark web for $5,000 in Bitcoin. He held it near the card reader. He waited. 1 second. 2 seconds. The reader beeped. The light turned green. Elias slipped inside and gently closed the door behind him. The silence of the warehouse was oppressive. It wasn't truly quiet. It was a low-frequency hum, the breathing of a sleeping giant. The ventilation systems rattled overhead, and somewhere deep in the maze of racks, a compressor cycled on and off with a heavy thud. He was in the Ben persona's clothes, but Ben was gone. This was Elias Thorne, reclaiming his kingdom from the rats. He moved quickly through the aisles. The towering racks of inventory stretched up into the gloom, casting long, skeletal shadows. He passed the packing station where Sarah had shared her sandwich with him just 12 hours ago. It looked desolate now, the tape guns hanging like holstered weapons. He thought of her daughter, Lily, waiting for a heart surgery that a computer algorithm had decided was too expensive. The anger flared again, hot and focusing. Server Node 4 was located in the administrative annex, a concrete bunker within the warehouse designed to house the local servers that managed logistics, payroll, and inventory for the Midwest region. It was the nerve center. Elias approached the door. This one was different. Reinforced steel. Biometric scanner. No keypad. No card slot. Just a glowing blue plate waiting for a thumbprint. He stopped. He hadn't accounted for a biometric upgrade. Vane must have installed this recently, off the books. Panic fluttered in his chest. He had come this far only to be stopped by a piece of glass? He looked around. Above the door was a drop ceiling. The panels were standard acoustic tiles, flimsy and unsecured. He dragged a plastic crate over, wincing as his sore muscles protested. He climbed up, pushed the tile aside, and peered into the plenum space above. It was tight, filled with dusty cables and conduit, but there was enough room to crawl. He pulled himself up. The metal grid of the ceiling groaned under his weight. He froze, dust raining down onto his face. Below, the hallway remained empty. He began to crawl, the sharp edges of the ductwork cutting into his knees. He moved over the wall of the server room and looked for a way down. There, a ventilation grate. He pulled a multi-tool from his pocket and unscrewed the 4 bolts. They were rusted, stubborn. He put every ounce of his strength into the turn, his knuckles whitening. Finally, the grate came loose. He lowered it carefully onto the top of a server rack below, then dropped down. He landed in the cool, blue-lit sanctuary of the server room. The noise here was louder. The constant, high-pitched whine of cooling fans spinning at 20,000 RPM. Rows of black monoliths blinked with frenetic green and amber lights. This was the brain of the operation. Elias moved to the main console. It was locked, demanding a password. He didn't try to hack the password. That would trigger an intrusion alert instantly. Instead, he reached around to the back of the rack and found the physical uplink port. He pulled out a USB cable and connected his own laptop, a sleek, unmarked machine he had brought in his waistband. He booted into a command line interface. He wasn't trying to enter through the front door. He was digging under the foundation. He began to type, his fingers flying across the keys. He was accessing the Ghost protocol, a diagnostic backdoor his father, the founder, had insisted on building into the kernel of the company's OS decades ago. It was a failsafe, a way for the owner to regain control if the board ever went rogue. Marcus Vane was arrogant. He thought he owned the company, but he only rented the furniture. He didn't know about the foundation. Access granted. Root privileges active. The screen filled with cascading lines of code. Elias ignored the inventory logs. He went straight for the payroll subroutines. And there it was. It wasn't a glitch. It was a masterpiece of malice. He found a script named optimization_v2. exe. He opened the source code. It was a simple, brutal logic loop. The script was designed to scan employee clock-in times. If an employee worked into overtime, the script would randomly insert break codes into the log. 15 minutes here, 30 minutes there. It was programmed to keep the total hours just below the threshold for full benefits eligibility. "You son of a bitch," Elias hissed. He scrolled further. The script didn't just delete the money. It reallocated it. The unpaid wages were categorized as system efficiency savings, and then transferred automatically to an external vendor account. MV Global Holdings, Cayman Islands. He checked the totals. In the last fiscal quarter alone, this script had stolen $4 million from the workers of the Midwest branch. $4 million taken from people like Sarah, people who taped their fingers to keep them from bleeding, people who ate stale sandwiches in a windowless room. Elias's hands shook, not from cold, but from rage. He started the download, copying files. He needed more. He needed the medical denials. He navigated to the HR directory. He searched for Sarah Jenkins. The file opened. He saw the flagged status, high-cost beneficiary. He saw the automated denial emails for her daughter's surgery. And then he saw something that made his blood freeze. There was a memo attached to her file, timestamped 2 days ago. From M. Vane to HR Director Subject. Re Jenkins appeal message. Deny it. Then terminate her employment. She's becoming a liability. We can't have people asking questions about the hours. It wasn't an algorithm. It was Marcus. He had personally signed Sarah's death warrant to protect his scam, copying files. Suddenly, the heavy steel door of the server room buzzed. Elias slammed the laptop lid shut, yanking the cable. He dove behind the far row of server racks, squeezing himself into the narrow gap between the hot metal and the wall. The door hissed open. Heavy footsteps clanged on the raised metal floor. A beam of a flashlight cut through the blue gloom. "I'm telling you, I heard a noise in the ceiling," a voice grumbled. It was Rick. Elias held his breath. His heart was hammering against his ribs so hard he was sure it would echo in the room. "Probably rats," a second voice replied. "Robert, the security guard. This place is crawling with them. Ring drive is inside." "I don't pay you to guess, Robert," Rick snapped. The flashlight beam swept across the console Elias had just used. "Someone was here. Look, the dust on the keyboard is disturbed." Elias squeezed his eyes shut. He had forgotten to wipe the keys. Maybe IT was running a diagnostic? Robert suggested. At 2:30 in the morning? Rick walked deeper into the room. He was moving toward Elias's hiding spot. The beam of light sliced past the edge of the rack, illuminating Elias's boot for a fraction of a second. Elias pulled his foot back, pressing himself into the darkness. Rick stopped. He was 5 feet away. Elias could hear the man's heavy breathing, smell the stale cigarette smoke clinging to his clothes. "Come out," Rick said softly. He didn't shout. He sounded amused. "I know you're in here. I can smell the wet dog on you." Elias's hand moved to his pocket. He had nothing. No weapon. Just the laptop and the multi-tool. If Rick found him, there would be no police. An intruder in the server room? Rick would break him in half and claim self-defense. Or worse, Vane would make him disappear. Rick took another step. ZZZT. A spark showered down from the ceiling, followed by a loud POP. Rick and Robert both jumped, spinning around. Up in the plenum, where Elias had forced the grate open, a loose cable he had nudged earlier finally gave way, shorting out against the metal frame. Smoke began to drift down. "Short circuit," Robert yelled. The rain must have leaked into the conduit. Rick stared at the ceiling, then back at the room. He seemed to weigh his options. "Damn it. If the fire suppression system trips, halon gas will fill this room and kill us both. Let's get out." "What about the intruder? If there's anyone in here, the gas will take care of them," Rick sneered. "Seal the door." They turned and ran. The heavy steel door slammed shut. The lock engaged with a mechanical thud. Elias let out a breath that was half sob, half laugh. He was safe from Rick. But now he was trapped. And if they triggered the suppression system? He scrambled out from behind the rack. He checked the laptop. Download complete. He had the gun. Now he just had to get out of the barrel. He looked up at the open vent. It was his only way out. But if Rick was right about the gas? A siren began to wail. A robotic voice filled the room. "Warning. Fire detected in Sector 4. Halon release in 60 seconds. Evacuate immediately." 60 seconds, Elias muttered. He grabbed the plastic crate he had used earlier. Wait, he had left the crate in the hallway. He had nothing to stand on. He looked at the server rack. It was smooth metal, unclimbable. No, the cables. He ran to the back of the rack. Thick bundles of Ethernet and power cables ran vertically up the spine of the machine. He grabbed a handful of them. They were slick with dust. "Sorry, Dad," he grunted and pulled. He scaled the server rack like a climber on a rock face, his boots slipping on the metal casing. The cables dug into his hands. He reached the top of the rack just as the countdown hit 30 seconds. He grabbed the edge of the vent. He hauled himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. He squeezed his shoulders through the opening, dragging his hips, his legs. Halon release in 10 seconds. He kicked his legs free and rolled into the dusty plenum space above the ceiling just as a loud whoosh erupted below. He peered through the grate. The room below was instantly filled with a thick, white fog. The chemical fire suppressant sucked the oxygen out of the air in seconds. If he had been down there, he would be unconscious by now. Dead in minutes. Elias lay in the dark, coughing in the dust. He clutched the laptop to his chest. He crawled back the way he came over the maze of ductwork until he reached the panel above the hallway. He listened. Silence. Rick and Robert must have retreated to the main control room to monitor the fire. He dropped down into the hallway. He didn't run this time. He walked with a deadly, quiet purpose. He slipped out the side door, back into the rain. The cold air hit his lungs like a blessing. He scrambled through the mud, back through the hole in the fence, and didn't stop until he was a mile away, huddled in the back of an all-night diner, shivering uncontrollably. He ordered a black coffee. His hands were covered in grease and soot. His face was streaked with mud. He looked like a wreck. But as he opened the laptop and saw the files, thousands of pages of theft, lies, and ruined lives, Elias Thorne smiled. It was a terrifying smile. He pulled out his phone, his burner phone. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "News desk," a tired voice answered. "Chicago Tribune." "Don't hang up," Elias said, his voice raspy but steady. "I have a story. I have proof of massive corporate fraud at Ethelgard Tech. And I have the receipts." "Who is this?" the reporter asked, suddenly alert. "Call me Ben," Elias said, "and tell your editor to clear the front page for tomorrow. The king is about to fall." He hung up. He took a sip of the coffee. It was burnt and bitter, just like the one in the break room. Tasted like victory. But the war wasn't over. He had the evidence. Now he had to survive the meeting, because when Marcus Vane realized the servers had been breached, he wouldn't send security guards. He would send cleaners. Elias closed the laptop. He had 24 hours until the board meeting. He wasn't going back to the penthouse. He wasn't going back to the warehouse. He was going to war. The dawn over Chicago was the color of a bruise, a swollen mix of purple and gray that promised no warmth, only a continuation of the relentless, freezing drizzle. Inside the executive suite on the 50th floor of the Ethelgard Tower, the climate was controlled, the air purified and scented with sandalwood, but the atmosphere was far more volatile than the storm outside. Marcus Vane stood behind his desk, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the mahogany. He wasn't looking at the city. He was staring at the man standing by the door, his personal fixer, a former military contractor named Graves who wore suits that cost more than a warehouse worker's annual salary and carried himself with the lethal stillness of a viper. "Explain it to me again," Vane said, his voice dangerously low. "And do it slowly." Graves didn't blink. "The fire suppression system in Sector 4 didn't malfunction, Mr. Vane. It was triggered manually. The localized sensors picked up a short circuit in the ceiling plenum, but the timing is too convenient. The logs show a physical connection was made to server node 4 at 2:14 a.m. The connection lasted 6 minutes. Then the fire started. Vane slammed his fist onto the desk, the sound cracking like a gunshot in the silent room. "What was taken?" "Everything," Graves replied calmly. "The payroll subroutines, the shell company routing numbers, the medical denial overrides. Whoever was in there bypassed the standard OS and went straight through the kernel. They knew exactly where to look. This wasn't a smash and grab. It was a surgical extraction." Vane felt a cold sweat prickle at the base of his neck. He loosened his tie, suddenly feeling like the silk was a noose. "Who?" "We pulled the perimeter footage," Graves said, tapping a tablet. He swiped the screen and held it up. The grainy black and white footage showed a figure sprinting through the rain, slipping through a hole in the fence. The face was obscured by a hood, but the build, the gait. It was familiar. Graves swiped again. A freeze frame from the warehouse floor earlier that day. A man arguing with Rick about the ambulance. "The temp?" Vane whispered, the realization settling in his stomach like lead. "Ben. He fits the profile." Graves nodded. "New hire. Keeps to himself. But look at how he moves. That's not a laborer. That's someone trained. Someone focused. He played the hero with the broken leg to test the response time of the management. He's a plant. Corporate espionage. Probably hired by frantic competitors or maybe the feds." Vane paced the room, his mind racing. If the feds had the data, agents would be kicking down the doors already. The fact that the police weren't here meant Ben was working alone, or he was looking to make a deal. He hasn't leaked it yet, Vane calculated. He's waiting. The board meeting is at 10 a.m. tomorrow. He wants to ambush me. "I can find him," Graves said. "He's on foot. He swiped out at the side gate but hasn't used a credit card or a registered phone since. He's a ghost, but ghosts leave footprints in the mud. Vane turned to the window, watching the rain lash against the glass. He imagined the empire he had built, the siphoned millions, the offshore accounts, the power crumbling because of a minimum wage packer with a hero complex. "I don't just want you to find him, Graves," Vane said, his reflection in the glass twisting into a snarl. "I want him erased. Bring me that laptop. And then make sure Ben becomes just another tragic statistic of this city's crime rate. Do it before the sun comes up tomorrow." Miles away, in the gritty underbelly of the Loop, Elias Thorne sat in the back booth of a 24-hour copy shop that smelled of toner and floor wax. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing flicker. He was surrounded by the hum of machines, the rhythmic swish-clack of a high-speed copier churning out pages. He looked like a wreck. His hoodie was still damp, smelling of the halon gas and sewer water. His hands were stained with grease. To the sleepy clerk behind the counter, he was just another homeless junkie trying to get out of the rain. But Elias's mind was sharper than it had ever been. He watched the pages stack up in the output tray. 500 pages of evidence. He wasn't trusting the cloud. He wasn't trusting a USB drive that could be corrupted or lost. He was printing the truth in black and white. Hard copies. Undeniable. Physical. He picked up a sheet. It was a spreadsheet detailing the efficiency cuts for Q3. He traced the line item for safety equipment maintenance. Budget $0. Beside it was a transfer of $50,000 to Vane Consulting retainer fee. He felt a wave of nausea. He remembered the boy's leg snapping under the pallet. That wasn't an accident. That was a line item. That was a transaction. He shoved the papers into a thick manila envelope and sealed it. He paid the clerk with the last of his crumpled cash, counting out the singles with trembling fingers. "Keep the change," Elias muttered, grabbing the heavy envelope. "Hey, buddy," the clerk called out, eyeing the package. "You look like you're in trouble. You need me to call someone?" Elias paused at the door. He looked at his reflection in the glass, hollow-eyed, unshaven, desperate. "No," he said softly. "I'm the one making the call." He stepped out into the street. The city felt different now. Before, Chicago was a playground, a collection of restaurants and theaters and penthouses. Now it was a labyrinth. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every passing car looked like a black SUV. He needed to move. He couldn't go back to his apartment. Vane would have eyes on the penthouse. He couldn't go to the police. Vane owned half the precinct captains. He had to stay in the wind until the meeting. But first, there was one loose end. One person who was in the crosshairs because of him. He found a payphone near the L train station. It was covered in graffiti and smelled of urine, but it had a dial tone. He dialed Sarah's number from memory. He had seen it in her file. It rang 4 times. "Hello." Her voice was small, fearful. "Sarah, it's Ben." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Ben. Oh my God. Are you okay?" "Rick came in this morning screaming. They had security tearing apart your locker. They said you set a fire." "I didn't set the fire, Sarah, but I did light a fuse." Elias huddled deeper into the phone booth as a police cruiser rolled slowly down the block. He turned his back to the street. "Listen to me. You need to leave your apartment. Tonight." "What? Why?" "Ben, you're scaring me. Vane knows I took the files. He knows we talked. He's gonna try to use you to get to me. Take Lily. Go to a hotel. Pay cash. Go to your sister's in Wisconsin if you can. Just don't be home tonight." "Ben, I can't," she sobbed. "Lily is on oxygen. I can't move her like that. And I don't have the money for a hotel. I don't understand what's happening." Elias closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against the cold metal of the phone. He had dragged an innocent woman into a corporate war zone. He was the billionaire. He was supposed to fix things, not break them. "Okay," he said, his voice stealing. "Stay there. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone. Not the police, not Ethelgard security, no one. I'm coming to you. You can't come here. If they're looking for you." "I'm not coming to hide, Sarah. I'm coming to finish this. Meet me at the 24-hour diner on 4th in 1 hour." The one near the hospital. Bring Lily's medical paperwork. Why? Just bring it. Trust me one last time. He hung up before she could argue. The journey to the diner was a lesson in evasion. Elias stuck to the alleyways and the crowded subway cars. He saw his own face, or rather, a sketch of Ben, flash on a digital billboard for a generic Crime Stoppers alert. Wanted for arson and industrial sabotage. Vane moved fast. He was weaponizing the media narrative already. When he walked into the diner, he spotted Sarah immediately. She was sitting in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the earth. She looked terrified. Elias slid into the booth opposite her. He placed the heavy manila envelope on the table between them. "You look terrible," she whispered, scanning his bruised face and dirty clothes. "I've had a long night," Elias said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the USB drive, the backup copy. He slid it across the table. "Take this." "What is it?" "It's everything. The theft, the fraud, the reason your insurance was denied. It's your insurance policy, Sarah. If anything happens to me, if I don't walk out of that building tomorrow, you give this to the FBI. You give it to the New York Times. You burn them to the ground." Sarah stared at the drive, her hands trembling. "Ben, who are you? Really? You hack servers, you talk like you're used to giving orders. You're not just a temp." Elias looked at her. He saw the fatigue etched into her face. The same fatigue he had ignored for years from his ivory tower. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to say, "I own this company." But he couldn't. Not yet. The reveal had to be public. It had to be undeniable. "I'm the guy who's going to fix the mistake," Elias said ambiguously. "Listen to me. Tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., there is a board meeting. I'm going to be there." "You can't," Sarah hissed. "Security will shoot you on sight. Rick has your picture at every checkpoint." "I know a way in," Elias said. "But I need you to do something for me. I need you to go to the hospital tomorrow morning. Be there at 10 o'clock. Have your phone on." "Why?" "Because by 10:05 you're going to get a call authorizing Lily's surgery. I promise you." Sarah searched his eyes, looking for a lie. She found only a terrifying, calm resolve. She slowly reached out and took the USB drive. "Be careful, Ben. Please. Go home, Sarah. Lock the door." He watched her leave. Once she was gone, Elias ordered a coffee and a plate of eggs he didn't eat. He sat there as the hours ticked by, the diner emptying out until he was the only patron left. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was waiting. At 4 a.m., he left the diner. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets slick and black. He walked toward the downtown district, toward the Ethelgard Tower. He didn't go to the entrance. He went to a private gym 2 blocks away, a place where he had a lifetime membership under his real name. The receptionist, a sleepy college student, barely looked up as Elias swiped his key fob. The machine beeped. Access granted. He walked into the locker room. It was pristine, smelling of eucalyptus and expensive soap. He stripped off the filthy warehouse clothes, the hoodie, the jeans, the boots. He threw them into the trash. They landed with a heavy thud. He stepped into the shower. The hot water hit him like a hammer, washing away the mud, the grease, the halon residue. He watched the gray water swirl down the drain. He scrubbed his skin until it was raw. He stepped out and dried off. He stood in front of the mirror. He shaved the patchy stubble, revealing the sharp, aristocratic jawline of Elias Thorne. He combed his hair back. He opened his gym locker. Inside, kept for emergencies, was a spare suit. It wasn't one of his Italian masterpieces. It was a simple charcoal gray suit, professional but understated. He put on the white shirt. He buttoned the cuffs. He tied the tie, a Windsor knot, perfect and symmetrical. He put on the jacket, fit like armor. He looked in the mirror. The Ben disguise was gone, but Elias Thorne had changed too. The eyes staring back weren't the bored, detached eyes of a billionaire playboy. They were the eyes of a wolf who had tasted blood. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the bottom and survived. He picked up the manila envelope. It was the only thing he carried.
No briefcase.
No phone. Just the truth. He checked his watch.
6:30 a.m.
The building would be opening for the cleaning crews and early staff. Vane would be expecting Ben to try to sneak in through the garage or the service entrance. He would be expecting a hacker, a thief. He wouldn't be expecting the CEO to walk through the front door. Elias walked out of the gym and onto the street. The morning sun was trying to break through the clouds, casting long, dramatic shadows against the skyscrapers. The wind whipped at his suit jacket, but he didn't feel the cold anymore. He approached the Ethelgard Tower. The massive glass revolving doors spun slowly. 2 security guards stood outside, their hands resting near their belts. They were looking for a bum in a hoodie. Elias walked straight toward them. He walked with the stride of a man who owned the pavement beneath his feet. "Good morning," Elias said as he passed them. The guards blinked, taken aback by the confidence, the suit, the aura of authority. They nodded instinctively. "Morning, sir." They didn't recognize him. They saw the suit, not the face. They saw the class, not the man. Elias stepped into the lobby. It was a cathedral of marble and glass. The receptionist was just setting up her desk. The elevators were waiting. He pressed the button for the 50th floor. The ride-up was smooth, silent. His ears popped as the elevator ascended. With every floor, he left the mud and the misery of the warehouse further behind. But he carried the memory of it in his heart. He carried Sarah's fear. He carried the broken leg of the boy on line 7. The elevator dinged. Level 50, Executive Boardroom. The doors opened. The hallway was empty, save for Graves standing guard outside the double mahogany doors of the boardroom. The meeting wasn't for another 3 hours, but Vane was likely already inside, preparing his defense, spinning his web of lies. Graves looked up. His eyes narrowed. He recognized the walk before he recognized the face. He stepped forward, his hand moving inside his jacket. "Hold it right there," Graves growled. "This floor is restricted." Elias didn't stop. He walked straight toward the hitman. "I said stop," Graves barked, pulling a taser from his holster. Elias stopped 3 feet from him. He looked Graves in the eye. "Get out of my way," Elias said. "You're not on the list, pal. Turn around or I drop you." Elias smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. "You work for Ethelgard, don't you, Graves? You're a contractor?" "I work for Mr. Vane." "No," Elias corrected him. "You work for the man who signs the checks. And unless you want your contract terminated and your pension liquidated by noon, you will step aside and open that door."
Graves hesitated.
He looked at the face. He saw the resemblance to the portraits in the hallway. He saw the eyes. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "Mr. Thorne?" Graves stammered, lowering the weapon. "Open it," Elias commanded. Graves swallowed hard. He turned and pushed the heavy doors open. Elias adjusted his cuffs. He took a deep breath. He gripped the envelope tighter. It was time to bring the house down. The boardroom of Ethelgard Tech was a masterpiece of acoustic engineering, designed to ensure that the silence was as imposing as the noise. The walls were paneled in acoustically dampened walnut, absorbing the hum of the city 50 floors below, leaving only the sterilized, climate-controlled air and the subtle clinking of bone china coffee cups. 12 men and women sat around the oval table, a collection of individuals whose combined net worth exceeded the GDP of a small nation. They were the architects of the economy, the silent movers who viewed the world through spreadsheets and quarterly projections. At the head of the table, Marcus Vane stood before a massive projection screen, a laser pointer in his hand and a sheen of confident sweat on his upper lip. He was in his element. This was his theater, and these were his audience members, desperate for the comforting lullaby of rising profits. "As you can see from the Q3 projections," Vane said, his voice smooth, practiced, "the restructuring of the logistics division has yielded a 14% reduction in operational overhead. We've successfully trimmed the fat." He clicked the remote. A graph appeared, the line shooting upward in a jagged green ascent. "Now, I know there have been rumors," Vane continued, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial register. Rumors of labor unrest. Rumors of infrastructure challenges. I want to assure the board that these are isolated incidents. We had a minor security breach last night. A disgruntled former temporary employee attempting to sabotage a server node. But thanks to our robust security protocols, the threat was neutralized, and the individual is currently being sought by local law enforcement. A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Neutralized? Nodded old man Sterling, the chairman of the board, a man whose skin looked like parchment paper and whose eyes were clouded with cataracts and indifference. Good work, Marcus. We can't have anarchy in the ranks. What was the damage? Minimal. Vane lied, his smile never wavering. Some data corruption in the legacy logs, but nothing that affects the bottom line. In fact, by transitioning to the new automated payroll system provided by our partners at MV Consulting, we anticipate saving another $2 million by fiscal year-end. Excellent. Sterling wheezed. Motion to approve the CFO's report and authorize the CEO's bonus package? Seconded, said a woman in a Chanel suit, checking her watch. Vane's chest swelled. It was done. He had survived the night. He had survived the breach. Ben was a fugitive, shivering in some alleyway, and the evidence was likely ashes. He opened his mouth to accept the accolades, to cement his coup. Boom! The heavy double doors of the boardroom didn't just open. They were thrown wide with a force that rattled the crystal water pitchers on the table. Every head turned. Vane froze, his laser pointer skittering across the screen like a nervous firefly. Standing in the doorway was not security. It was not a waiter. It was Elias Thorne. But it wasn't the Elias they remembered. The grieving, absent son who had signed papers with a trembling hand 3 months ago. This man filled the frame. He was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him with military precision. His hair was slicked back, his face clean-shaven, revealing a jawline set in stone. He held a thick, battered manila envelope in one hand like a weapon. Behind him, Graves, the terrifying head of private security, stood silently, his head bowed, stepping aside to let the wolf pass. Elias! Sterling squinted, adjusting his spectacles. We weren't expecting you. Marcus said you were in Aspen. Elias didn't answer immediately. He walked into the room, his footsteps heavy and deliberate on the plush carpet. He didn't look at the board. He looked only at Marcus Vane. The intensity of his gaze was physical, a palpable pressure that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Marcus says a lot of things, Elias said. His voice was calm, baritone, and terrifyingly steady. Most of them are expensive lies. Vane's face went from flush to pale in the span of a heartbeat. He gripped the edge of the podium. Elias, you look well. We were just concluding. If you have questions, we can discuss them in my office. Sit down, Marcus, Elias said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. Excuse me? Vane bristled, trying to rally his arrogance. I am currently chairing this meeting in your absence. You can't just barge in here and... I said sit down. The command cracked like a whip. Elias reached the head of the table. He didn't take a seat. He stood next to Vane, invading his personal space, towering over him. He dropped the heavy manila envelope onto the mahogany table. Thud. The sound echoed in the silent room like a gavel strike. I haven't been in Aspen, Marcus, Elias said, addressing the room but keeping his eyes on the CFO. For the last 2 weeks, I have been in the South Chicago Distribution Center. I've been working on Line 7. I've been packing boxes. I've been eating lunch next to the boiler room. A confused whispering broke out among the board members. Undercover? Someone asked. Survival, Elias corrected. And while I was there, I met a man named Ben. Vane flinched. The name hung in the air. Ben is a quiet guy, Elias continued, pacing slowly around the table, making eye contact with every director. He works 60 hours a week. He tapes his fingers because the cardboard slices them open. He doesn't complain. But do you know what Ben found out? Elias stopped behind the chairman's chair. Ben found out that every Tuesday and Thursday, The time clock system, the one optimized by MV Consulting, automatically deducts 15 minutes from every employee's shift, just enough to keep them under the threshold for federal benefits, just enough to deny them health insurance. Preposterous, Vane sputtered, finding his voice. That's a glitch, a legacy error. I told you we are fixing. It's not a glitch, Elias cut him off. He reached into the envelope and pulled out a sheaf of papers. He fanned them out on the table. They were lines of code. Highlighted in neon yellow was the command loop. If overtime greater than 4 hours, then execute deduct or break. 15. This is the source code from server node 4, Elias said. I pulled it myself at 2 a.m. this morning. It was written by a programmer contracted to Vane Consulting. It's a theft algorithm, Marcus. You're stealing $4 million a quarter from the people who break their backs to build your bonus. The board members leaned in, staring at the code. They didn't understand the syntax, but they understood the accusation. This is absurd. Vane shouted, his composure cracking. You're listening to the rantings of a tourist. You played dress up for a week and think you understand how to run a multinational corporation? I saved this company. I cut costs. You didn't cut costs, Elias replied coldly. You cut lives. He pulled another document from the envelope. A photograph. It was a picture of a young man with a shattered leg, lying on the concrete floor. This is David. He's 22. A pallet collapsed on him yesterday because the safety wrapping was substandard. We saved 40 cents on plastic wrap. Marcus. And now David will limp for the rest of his life. And because of your glitch, he has no workman's comp. Elias pulled out another paper. A medical denial form. This is Sarah. She's a single mother. She's worked for us for 6 years. Her daughter needs heart surgery. Your algorithm denied her coverage 3 times. Yesterday, you personally emailed HR and told them to fire her to stop her from appealing. Elias slammed his hand down on the Sarah file. She's not a line item, Marcus. She's a mother. And you tried to kill her child to save a decimal point. The room was deathly silent. The board members looked at Vane, then at the papers, then at Elias. The abstraction of overhead reduction had suddenly become a visceral, bloody reality. This is emotional manipulation, Vane hissed, though he was backing away toward the window. This is business, Elias. It's ugly. It's hard. But the shareholders... The shareholders? Elias laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Do you think the shareholders will be happy when the FBI raids this building at noon? Vane froze. What? I didn't just print these files, Elias said softly. I sent copies to the Department of Labor, to the SEC, and to the Chicago Tribune. You didn't, Vane whispered, the blood draining from his face. You'd destroy the stock price. You'd tank your own net worth. I'd rather lead a company worth half as much that possesses a soul than $1 billion slaughterhouse, Elias said. He turned to the board. The stock will dip today. It will bleed, but we will survive. We will settle the lawsuits. We will pay the back wages. We will reinstate the insurance. And we will rebuild Ethelgard as a company that doesn't eat its own young. He pointed a finger at Marcus Vane. But first, we cut the cancer. I call for an immediate vote of no confidence in the CFO. I call for his immediate termination for cause and the forfeiture of all unvested stock options to cover the legal restitution. Sterling, the chairman, looked at the papers again. He looked at Vane, who was now sweating profusely, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. Sterling slowly closed the folder. All those in favor? Sterling asked, his voice rasping. One hand went up, then another, then the woman in the Chanel suit. Vane watched in horror as 12 hands raised in unison. It was a firing squad in slow motion. Marcus Vane, Sterling said. You are relieved of your duties effective immediately. Vane began to laugh. It was a shrill, manic sound. You fools. You think you can just fire me? I built the financial architecture of this place. I know where every skeleton is buried. You fire me, and I sing. I'll tell them about the tax shelters in Delaware. I'll tell them about the EPA violations in '98. He lunged toward the table, grabbing for the laptop connected to the projector. I'll burn this whole place down. Graves, Elias said calmly. The security chief moved with a blur of motion. Before Vane could touch the keyboard, Graves had his arm twisted behind his back. Vane shrieked in pain as he was slammed face first onto the polished mahogany table. "Get your hands off me!" Vane screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "I am the CFO. I am." "You're trespassing," Elias said, leaning down so his face was inches from Vane's ear. "And Marcus? About those skeletons? Go ahead and sing. I'm airing the laundry anyway. I'm resetting the board. You have no leverage. You have nothing." Elias stood up and buttoned his jacket. "Get him out of here. The police are waiting in the lobby." Graves hauled Vane to his feet. The once mighty executive was dragged kicking and screaming toward the door, his expensive Italian shoes scuffing the carpet. His dignity left in tatters on the floor. As the doors closed on Vane's wailing threats, silence returned to the boardroom. But it was different now. It wasn't the silence of stagnation. It was the silence of a storm that had just broken. Elias stood at the head of the table. He felt exhausted. His adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the aches of the warehouse work, the sore back, the bruised feet. But he felt lighter than he had in years. He looked at the empty chair where Vane had stood. Then he looked at the screen, where the jagged green line of efficiency still glowed. He reached over and pulled the power cord of the projector. The screen went black. "Gentlemen, ladies," Elias said, looking around the table, "we have a lot of work to do, and it's not going to be done from this room." "What do you mean, Elias?" Sterling asked, sounding genuinely afraid for the first time in decades. "I mean, we are instituting a new policy," Elias said. "Effective next month. Every member of this board will spend 1 week a year working on the floor. You will pack boxes. You will eat in the canteen. You will understand how the money is made." "You can't be serious," the Chanel woman gasped. "I am deadly serious," Elias said. "If you don't like it, you can resign. I'll accept your letters by the end of the day." He picked up the remote control Vane had dropped. He weighed it in his hand. "Now, if you'll excuse me," Elias said, "I have a phone call to make. There is a surgery scheduled for tomorrow, and I need to make sure the check clears." He turned and walked toward the door. He didn't ask for permission to leave. He didn't wait for dismissal. As he reached the door, he paused. He caught his reflection in the glass panel. The suit was immaculate. The hair was perfect. But underneath, he could still feel the phantom itch of the cardboard dust. He smiled. Ben was gone. But Elias Thorne would never forget him. He pushed the doors open and walked out into the hallway. His assistant, a young woman named Jessica who had been terrified of Vane, was standing at her desk, wide-eyed. She had heard the screaming. "Mr. Thorne?" she squeaked. Are we okay?" Elias stopped. He looked at the frantic activity starting to bubble up in the office. Phones ringing, people whispering, the news of the coup spreading like wildfire. "We're better than okay, Jessica," Elias said. "We're finally open for business." He walked toward the elevator. The up arrow was glowing green. "Where are you going, sir?" "You have a press conference in an hour." "I'll be back for it," Elias called over his shoulder. "But first, I have to go to the hospital. I have a friend waiting for good news." The elevator doors opened. Elias stepped in. As the doors closed, shutting out the world of high finance, he loosened his tie. He leaned his head back against the mirrored wall and closed his eyes. The war for the boardroom was won. But the promise to Sarah, that was the only victory that mattered. The chaos that followed the board meeting was not the destructive spiraling of a crash, but the frantic, messy birth of something new. For 3 days, the Ethelgard Tower was under siege, not by corporate raiders, but by the relentless, flashing strobe light of the national media. The story was too perfect, too cinematic to ignore. The billionaire prince who descended into the mud, the undercover boss who didn't just give out charity, but burned his own corrupt kingdom to the ground to save it. Elias Thorne watched the coverage from the back seat of his town car as it navigated the rain-slicked streets of Chicago. The screen embedded in the leather seat showed Marcus Vane doing the perp walk, his expensive suit jacket pulled over his head to hide his face from the cameras as FBI agents guided him into a federal vehicle. The chirons scrolling beneath the image screamed terms like embezzlement, grand larceny, and racketeering. It was the end of an era, the collapse of the House of Vane. But for Elias, watching the man who had poisoned his father's legacy finally face justice didn't bring a surge of triumph. It brought a quiet, heavy sense of closure, like closing a book that had been difficult to read. The car didn't head toward the tower. It turned west, away from the glittering skyline, toward the sprawling medical district. Elias adjusted the bouquet of yellow tulips in his lap, an absurdly simple gift for a man who could buy the hospital wing, but it felt like the only appropriate thing. He wasn't visiting as the CEO today. He was visiting as Ben. The pediatric cardiac unit was a hushed world of soft beeps and hushed whispers, a stark contrast to the roar of the warehouse. Elias walked down the corridor, his footsteps soft. He found room 402, ironically the same number as his locker at the plant. He knocked gently on the door frame. Sarah was sitting in a chair by the window, bathed in the soft morning light. She looked exhausted, her posture slumped, but the crushing weight of terror that had defined her face for the last 2 weeks was gone. In the bed, small and frail under a mountain of blankets, lay Lily. Wires and tubes connected her to a bank of monitors that hummed with a steady, rhythmic green line. Beep, beep, beep. It was the most beautiful sound Elias had ever heard. Sarah turned. When she saw him, she stood up, her hands trembling. She didn't bow. She didn't stammer. She just looked at him with eyes that were red from crying. "She made it," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "The surgery. The doctor said it was perfect. They repaired the valve." Elias exhaled, a breath he felt he had been holding since he first saw the denial letter in the server room. He stepped into the room and placed the flowers on the bedside table.
I'm glad, Sarah.
"I'm so glad. The hospital administrator came in this morning," Sarah said, looking at him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "He said the bill had been settled, in full. He said it was paid from a private account." He was shaking. Elias. "He treated me like I was royalty." "You are," Elias said softly. "You're the mother who fought for her child. That's more royal than any title I have." Sarah walked over to him. For a moment, he thought she might shake his hand or maintain the professional distance of an employee to an employer. Instead, she threw her arms around him and hugged him. It was a fierce, desperate hug, smelling of hospital soap and relief. Elias froze for a split second. He wasn't used to being touched, not like this, not without an agenda, but then he hugged her back. He felt the reality of what he had done. The numbers on the spreadsheet were abstract. The shaking shoulders of the woman in his arms were real. "Thank you," she sobbed into his expensive suit. "Thank you for saving her life." "I just gave you what was yours," Elias murmured. "I just fixed the glitch." He stayed for an hour. He sat by the bed as Lily woke up, groggy and confused. He introduced himself simply as a friend from work. He watched the way Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair, the way the sunlight hit the dust motes dancing in the air, and he realized that this quiet, sterile room held more value than the entire 50th floor of his tower. When he finally left, stepping back into the cool Chicago air, his phone buzzed. It was Sterling, the chairman. The stock had stabilized. The public statement, an unprecedented apology and a pledge of transparency, had been received better than expected. The market liked honesty, it turned out, or at least it liked a redemption arc. "Elias," Sterling's voice crackled. "The legal team is asking about the warehouse management. Rick, the floor manager. The union reps are demanding his head. What do you want to do?" Elias opened the car door but didn't get in. He looked toward the south, toward the industrial smudge on the horizon. "Don't fire him," Elias said. "Excuse me," Sterling sputtered. "After what he did. The liability." I said don't fire him, Elias repeated, his voice hard. Not over the phone. Not by email. I'm going down there. I want the entire shift assembled in the main bay in 1 hour. And tell Rick to be there. The return to the Ethelgard Logistics Center was a surreal inversion of his first arrival. 2 weeks ago, he had arrived in the dark, shivering in the rain, invisible. Today, his motorcade swept through the gates past a throng of news vans kept at bay by security. But this time, the security guards at the gate stood straighter. They didn't look bored. They looked alert, respectful. One of them, the man who had scanned his fake ID, gave him a tentative nod. The warehouse was silent. The belt had been stopped. 500 workers stood in the main loading bay, a sea of neon yellow vests. They were murmuring, anxious, unsure if the arrival of the CEO meant mass layoffs or a shutdown. Elias walked out onto the raised metal platform of the crow's nest, the very spot where Rick used to stand and scream insults. He didn't use a microphone. The acoustics of the cavernous space carried his voice. He looked down at the faces. He saw the old man with the cough. He saw the boy whose leg was in a cast, sitting in a wheelchair near the front. He saw the exhaustion, the wariness, the hard-earned skepticism of people who had been treated like machinery for years. My name is Elias Thorne, he began, but some of you know me as Ben. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Whispers broke out. It's him, someone said. The guy from line 7. I know what it's like to stand where you are, Elias continued, pacing the platform. I know the sound of the tape gun in your dreams. I know the sting of a paper cut that won't heal because the air is too dry. I know that the vending machine in the break room steals your money and the coffee tastes like battery acid. A few tentative chuckles rippled through the crowd. I came here to find the truth, Elias said, his voice darkening. And I found it. I found that this company, my father's company, had lost its way. We treated you like numbers. We stole your time. We stole your dignity. And for that, I am ashamed. He stopped pacing and looked directly at Rick, who was standing off to the side, looking pale and small despite his bulk. Rick, Elias said. The floor manager jumped. Yes, Mr. Thorne? Step forward. Rick walked into the center of the open space. He looked up at Elias, sweat glistening on his bald head. He looked like a bully who had suddenly realized the playground had walls. You told me that this place was a meat grinder, Elias said, his voice echoing off the rafters. You told me that if I broke, I would be replaced. You fostered a culture of fear. You forced people to work through injuries. You altered time clocks. I was just following orders. Rick stammered, his voice thin. Mr. Vane, he said productivity had to be. A leader protects his people. Elias cut him off. A leader stands between his team and the storm. You didn't lead, Rick. You drove them, and you enjoyed it. Elias looked at the workers. Effective immediately, Rick is terminated for cause. He is banned from all Ethelgard properties. A silence hung in the air for a heartbeat. And then, a solitary clap rang out. It was the boy in the wheelchair. Then another. Then a roar. It wasn't polite applause. It was a release of pressure. A cheering that shook the dust from the ceiling beams. Rick turned and hurried toward the exit, head down, stripping off his vest as he went, vanishing into the gray light of the parking lot. Elias waited for the noise to die down. But firing one man doesn't fix the rot, Elias said. So here is the new deal. Starting today, the glitch is gone. Every minute you work is paid. Overtime is double time, not time and a half. We are retroactively paying every cent that was stolen from you over the last 5 years, with interest. Gasps of disbelief filled the room. We are hiring a full-time medical staff for the floor, Elias continued, listing the changes he had drafted on the napkin in the diner. The break times are extended to 45 minutes. And the coffee, he smiled slightly, is free, and it will be actual coffee. He walked down the stairs of the platform, descending onto the floor. He didn't want to be above them anymore. He wanted to be among them. He walked over to the boy in the wheelchair. David, isn't it? The boy nodded, eyes wide. I'm sorry about your leg, Elias said. Ethelgard covers all your medical bills. And while you heal, your job is waiting. In fact, I need someone to help audit the safety protocols. Someone who knows what can go wrong. Interested? Yes, sir, David stammered. I mean, yes, Ben. Elias smiled. He turned to the crowd. He saw the hope in their eyes. It was fragile, tentative, but it was there. They weren't just employees anymore. They were allies. This company bears the name Ethelgard, Elias said, raising his voice so all could hear. In the old tongue, it means noble protector. We haven't lived up to that name. But starting today, we earn it. We don't just ship boxes. We support families. We build futures. Let's get back to work. Elias didn't leave immediately. He stayed on the floor. He shook hands. He listened to grievances. He looked at pictures of grandkids. He wasn't the distant god in the penthouse. He was the man who had cleaned up the mess. Late that evening, as the second shift began, Elias stepped out of the warehouse. The rain had finally stopped, and the clouds had broken. The setting sun cast a warm, golden light across the wet pavement, turning the puddles into mirrors. He walked to his car, but stopped at the gate. He looked back at the massive building. It was still an ugly concrete box, still noisy, still industrial. But the air felt different, felt lighter. He thought of his father. The old man had been a genius, but he had been blind to the human cost of his ambition. Elias realized that his own legacy wouldn't be defined by the stock price or the skyscrapers. It would be defined by Sarah's smile in the hospital room. It would be defined by the safety of the men and women inside that building. He took the thick, black-rimmed glasses out of his pocket, the Ben glasses. He looked at them for a long moment, remembering the fear, the pain, and the clarity they had given him. He thought about throwing them away, tossing them into the mud as a final goodbye to the past. But he didn't. He folded them carefully and slid them into the inside pocket of his suit, right next to his heart. He would keep them. He would keep them as a reminder that the view from the bottom was the only one that mattered. A reminder that a king who doesn't know the weight of a stone cannot ask his people to build a castle. Elias Thorne got into the car. Back to the office, sir? The driver asked. Elias looked out the window at the city, now glowing with the promise of the evening. Yes, Elias said. Take me to the office. I have a lot of work to do. As the car pulled away, merging into the traffic of the city, he now truly understood. The lights of the Ethelgard sign buzzed on behind him. They didn't flicker. They shone steady and bright, a beacon in the twilight, watching over the people who made the world move. The storm was over. The work had just begun.